This week, I'm joined by John Strand. We're going to interview Randall Trzeciak, the director of the CERT Insider Threat Center at Carnegie Mellon University's Software Engineering Institute. And we're going to talk about insider threats. How about that? In the enterprise security news, RSA has announced its finalist for the Innovation Sandbox. DigiCert is announcing an all-in-one digital certificate management solution. Google's new Chrome extension was not for the show, but it's interesting nonetheless. Signal Sciences raises $35 million. Palo Alto is rumored to be purchasing security firm Demisto, so we'll talk about that. And so much more, so stay tuned for Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer's sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. Welcome to episode number 125 of Enterprise Security Weekly for February 6th, 2019. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined by the slightly injured Mr. John Strand, who's braving it out for the show. John, welcome.
Thanks for having me on the show. Just, from the official BHIS couch, I guess, this week.
Interesting. We have a couch too. It's funny how that works. All these progressive companies that we run, John, we have couches instead of desks.
I got to be honest. Anytime I go on site, if I go to a business and they don't have couches in the work area, or we also have a really nice fireplace too.
Oh, nice.
I get a little sad for the people that work at those places.
And your Christmas tree is still up, John. Christmas was last month.
Yeah. Well,
I had to call you out on that one.
Yeah, it's just early for next year, Paul.
Oh, yeah, there you go. You're in the Christmas spirit already. Good to have you, John. Quick announcement before we get started. The RSA conference, of course, is coming up March 4th through the 8th. Make sure you go to rsaconference.com/security-weekly-US19. Register and use the discount code 5U9SWFD and get $100 off the conference pass, even if you're interested in a briefing with Security Weekly. I know many of you have been reaching out if you're interested in briefings or interviews, and the interviews we do at RSA and all conferences this year will be aired on this show, which is pretty awesome. You can go to securityweekly.com/conference request, submit your request, fill that form out, and we will work in for a briefing if it gets approved by myself and company on the approval process, and also for the paid interviews. We get to learn about your company and products and have it air right here on the show. Randall Trzeciak is the principal security engineer and technical manager of CERT's Enterprise Threat and Vulnerability Management team. He's also presenting at InfoSec World, which is another conference coming up that we'll be at, on the topics of insider threat. So, Randy, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to share some of the work we're doing. As you can see, I'm not on a couch. Unfortunately, I don't have a couch in my office in Pittsburgh, but it's great to be here nonetheless. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's nice to have you, Randy. And it seems like your role today is really to study insider threats in various capacities. Is that true?
That's correct. So we're part of Carnegie Mellon University, specifically the Software Engineering Institute. The Software Engineering Institute is a federally funded research and development center. So we are funded by the Department of Defense with the goal to research two primary areas: software security, and cybersecurity. So as a federally funded research and development center, our goal is to take empirical data to analyze incidents and try to determine what are the potential risk indicators in my domain of insider threats to organizations, critical assets. So as an FFRDC, we don't build tools. We cannot compete with consulting organizations. So we're here to do objective research with a goal to transition that knowledge out to the population around those two primary areas.
And Randy, we were talking about studying behavior of people as a potential indicator to some type of insider threat, essentially. What type of behavioral research have you done, and have you drawn any conclusions to tie specific behavior that ultimately results in some type of insider threat or incident?
Well, that's a great question. From the CERT perspective, the CERT division of the SEI, we have a technical mission looking at ways to develop anomaly detection capabilities for insider incidents. Insider incidents, the goal of your security program should prevent incidents from happening. Those incidents obviously can be committed by an external adversary, an internal adversary, or an internal person that doesn't have malicious intent, but still causes harm to your organization. So for about 18 years, we've been researching insider threats. We've amassed a repository of over 2,500 insider incidents. We've modeled those into what we think are the ways by which insider incidents tend to evolve over time. We've been very fortunate over the number of years to work with behavioral psychologists, because as you can imagine, insiders are human. There is a human element to some, if not all of the insider incidents that we've analyzed. Behavioral psychologists have described ways by which motivations might influence an individual's desire to want to cause harm to an organization. So looking at some of those behavioral risk indicators that you described, some of those could be ways by which you observe individual behavior, things that work and occur in the workplace, such as conflicts with coworkers, conflicts with supervisors, ways by which we can identify performance problems, other ways by which we can observe individuals maybe doing drugs within the workplace or be under the influence of alcohol. And what our research is to try to identify ways by which you can combine the behavioral-based research into behavioral indicators, and then combine that with the technical risk that's been observed by traditionally someone in an insider threat analyst role in the organization or someone in a security operations center. And what we found, significant amount of data that shows that the behavioral characteristics are available well before the technical risk indicators can be observed within the organization. And really what we want to set the stage is by saying is that if you are going to include that behavioral risk indicators, make sure you're working with human resources and your general counsel, because the program that you build to mitigate insider threats should protect the high value assets of the organizations, but also protect the privacy and civil liberties of the people within your organization.
And I think that's the hardest part for most organizations, right? That integration with HR, because HR likes to think of themselves as a silo. Security likes to think of themselves as a silo. And the idea of HR feeding like performance metrics over to the security team, especially negative performance metrics, absolutely terrifies a large number of non-DoD IC organizations. So what do you think are some good examples? Is there any documentation that's available for people to kind of say that HR and security do need to work together for addressing insider threats?
That's a great question, and it's a great point. It's the starting point for many organizations to build the insider threat council, the governance structure over top of the program that has representation from information technology, but equal representation from human resources, from your general counsel, from a physical security. Risk needs to be part of the program building, the strategy for the program, and ultimately you do need to have a senior designated official above the program that can ensure participation in the program. Really, the goal is what we want to be able to do is to try to identify ways by which we can combine the human element of insider threat mitigation with the technical mitigation as well. And some of the points that I would call your attention to would be, from an organization standpoint, there's a number of documented organizations such as the National Insider Threat Task Force. Since 2011, there's been a mandate in the federal government to build formal insider threat programs. So they established the NITF, the National Insider Threat Task Force. a great source of information of how you can combine human resources with physical security, with information technology, with the chief risk officer in the organization to build that enterprise-wide risk assessment of the threats in the form of an insider threat or insider mitigation program.
It takes many shapes and forms in terms of technology, Randy, to monitor insider threat and behavior, and also balance, with people's privacy, as we've talked about this week on a couple of different shows already. But one of the things that I was curious about was my kind of theory was, well, if someone is disgruntled, right, they're unhappy in their job, you've observed that. We were talking about technology where if you're an enterprise and you're monitoring enterprise chats, they can determine the overall mood of a particular department or specific people. And if someone is disgruntled, I thought, well, maybe they'll look to go find the intellectual property and sell the intellectual property. But your research has seemed to contradict that, my theory, which was not based on science, but just one of Paul's crazy theories.
Well, as we said, we have a significant amount of data. What we try to do is break those incidents into common types, how the incidents tend to evolve over time. What we have found is that people who are motivated for revenge, the disgruntled employees, tend to be categorized as an individual progressing down the path to want to cause harm to the organization. There's a clear motivation of revenge, in many cases for a perceived injustice. So we've seen similarities between the motivation of revenge, disgruntlement, from someone that may go on and down the path to commit an IT sabotage type incident. Mm-hmm. We found a lot of parallels between an IT saboteur to someone that is progressing down the path to commit an incident like workplace violence. And clearly, a number of incidents have described the motivations of disgruntlement for those incident types. Now, looking at different incident types, such as someone stealing intellectual property, based upon the data that we have of close to 300 incidents, the people aren't disgruntled. They're not leaving the company and stealing the IP to get revenge. They're not motivated to get revenge against the organization. They tend to be stealing the intellectual property primarily for a business advantage. They can advance in their career, going to a competing organization or to start a competing organization of their own as well. And then looking at another incident type, such as insider fraud, not a clear motivation of someone who wants to get revenge, and the reason they're stealing money is to get revenge. It usually is to benefit them financially or a personal advantage, having access to data. And then you can certainly look at the different incident types, particularly in the federal government, of espionage activity. In some cases, those were based upon motivation of disgruntlement. But in some cases, again, financial gain is the reason why the people went on to commit a national security incident that is relating in espionage as well. So the general narrative is disgruntled employees, but that's not always the case based upon our data.
But I also think the time, which you talked about at the beginning of the show, and what you said there is really important, because whenever people are discussing, insiders doing this for financial gain, it makes them look just simply greedy. Whereas whenever I was working in DODIC, a lot of the insider situations that we dealt with, and thankfully a lot of them were resolved before they escalated to full nastiness, but many times there's a precursor of financial strain put on that employee prior to the insider threat activity. It could be a bankruptcy due to sickness. It could be an addiction to any variety of different drugs, an addiction to porn. There's some type of strain that usually precursors, then those people become a much higher risk. So when they're doing it, from what we've seen for financial gain, many times there's something else happening in their life that actually drives that.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. A documented research body, if you were to do a search for the critical pathway to insider incidents, a lot of that was developed out of the work we did here at Carnegie Mellon, but also psychologist Dr. Eric Shaw, Laura Sellers as well. It describes this critical pathway to insider incidents, beginning with general characteristics described as personal predispositions. Then it migrates into the stressors, financial stressors, personal stressors, professional stressors. And then the concerning behavior becomes exhibiting characteristics in the workplace. And then finally, they move into what's described as the crime script itself. And particularly when it's related to fraud, we did find the stressors were the potential reason why they started their fraudulent activity. But at the time that they were caught by the organizations, many times they already overcame the financial need that may have been the initial motivation of the fraud activity, but it transgressed into the greed. They were able to get away with it for a longer period of time, and it just went undetected, so it continued to continue over time. So yes, the data that we have does support those precipitating events, the financial stressors, financial needs, in the one incident type being the fraudulent activity that we've researched from an insider incident perspective.
So whenever you see organizations or whenever you're making recommendations to organizations and you're sitting down, you're having a conversation with HR and IT security, and they say, okay, we've identified somebody that's showing precursors. They have financial issues, they have workspace issues, something is happening to that person. What do you see in your research is the best way to handle that? Should organizations immediately fire those people, or should they try to isolate those people? Should they try to help them through those situations? Because it's one thing to be able to identify the path, but it gets into a much more interesting conversation of what you can do at the different points in the path to basically reduce the insider risk.
Now, here's where I, as a technologist, rely upon human resources and general counsel being part of that insider threat program. So what I would describe, and what that mandate we talked about before, that executive order says, organizations, when they create a formal insider threat program, should create a data analytic hub, pulling data together and integrating it from information technology, but also consider human resources, physical security, data that's being generated from across all the sensors in your organization, pulling that together into one data analytic hub. Now, here's where we need the participation from human resources. We found that a number of the tools that are integrating data together can have the ability to anonymize the data. And this is where we get some of the participation from human resources, convincing general counsel that when we're pulling the data together, it's anonymized, that we as an organization define what the thresholds are to move it from just an anomaly that's being generated out of a tool to something that begins an inquiry process. The inquiry process then has thresholds to move it possibly into an investigation. And not until you get to the investigative stage that you buy-in from human resources and general counsel to actually identify the individual that was actually causing those alerts to be triggered. So we're protecting the data we're pulling together by anonymizing it. We have clearly defined thresholds. We demonstrate the need to say why an inquiry is beginning, why the investigation is beginning, and then we get the approval from general counsel and human resources to re-identify those individuals. That will ensure that the organization has clearly defined thresholds that are consistently enforced. To whether it's your chief executive in your organization creating that alert, or it's someone at the lowest level in your organization creating an alert, you're handling all of those the same way as well. But you absolutely do need the buy-in from human resources from the general counsel to identify and to allow us to continue to identify what the alerts are, but what are the thresholds that move it beyond just an alert out of a tool.
So if an organization has an individual that's actually triggered those thresholds and they're exhibiting those risk behaviors, they haven't gone to full insider threat yet, but they've exhibited enough of the triggers to begin the investigation, how do you think organizations should handle those people that definitely are under financial stress, that are definitely exhibiting kind of the pattern of going down the pathway of becoming an insider threat?
Well, we've seen some organizations actually have some of those risk indicators being financial need, financial stress, identifying people early on. In many cases, they're able to refer those folks with the review and approval of general counsel into the human resource functions such as employee assistance programs. Certainly, you as an organization spend lots of time and money to recruit people, to hire people, to make them productive employees in your organization. What we want to be able to do is to work with those people, not always taking the immediate step of termination when we start seeing these risk indicators, but actually trying to minimize some of the stress caused by some of those potential risk indicators, and eventually, hopefully, mitigating the stress then would actually hopefully divert them off that critical pathway to an insider incident. And keeping in mind that financial stress is just one component of a risk indicator. And certainly if you were to ask a survey in your organization, how many of your employees are under some amount of financial stress? I'd say the vast majority of your organization's employees are under some amount of financial stress. So that alone is not the risk indicator. It's the risk indicator in combination with other risk indicators that should be part of those thresholds built into the insider threat program.
And I really love that point that you said where the organization needs to work with the individual. And I think it's important that people understand that that's not just an altruistic, we're being nice kind of approach, The reason why organizations need to work with individuals is because if organizations immediately fire individuals that are exhibiting risk indicators, multiple risk indicators, then that actually sets a culture for the rest of the organization. So if other people start exhibiting those types of things in their life, they're going to be far less likely to actually bring that to the attention of their work management and try to get those issues addressed working with their company. And they're more likely to start burying those issues. And when we were working in classified environments, that was our number one fear, is that someone would have something in their life that could be used as leverage against them, be it personal, be it behavioral, lifestyle, or financial. And they did not feel comfortable to come and talk to the security team. So we could assist them, get them with HR, get them into some programs to get better. And if we were closing off and firing people immediately, it would drive those issues further underground. And that would actually further precipitate greater risk of insiders later on.
Yeah, that's absolutely a great point. And certainly the goal of an organization is to attract people to come to work for the organization, to retain the employees to continue throughout their career to work for the organization. And unfortunately, the perception of an insider threat program tends to have a negative connotation. So we do work with organizations who even consider something as rudimentary as, what are you calling your insider threat program? Many times we work with organizations that avoid the insider threat program. They may call it insider risk or risk management. And one of the threats in risk management is insider, but also external threat management as well. And really what we try to do is help organizations to name the program, to communicate the existence of the program, but also to ensure that the program, as it's collecting data, it's protecting the data that's collecting, which is very sensitive, appropriately through an appropriate governance structure. And then finally, if I could just kind of refer people to a report that's on our website, which is called the Positive Incentives to Reduce Insider Threats Within Your Organizations. And really the summary of that report is that most security controls that are put in place in organizations tend to be negative, to where we're trying, in the perception of the employees, to catch people doing something. And when we catch them doing something, we're going to sanction you or take some action. Worst case, we're terminating people for the actions that are observed by this particular insider threat program. What we try to do is work with organizations, and we share some of the strategies of how do we combine the positive incentives with the negative, typically IT controls that are put in place to create a more attractive culture to retain the employees. And really what we try to say is that get employees connected with their job, with their career path in the organization, and making sure that there's a perception, if not a reality, of organization commitment to them and their job and their role in the organization. But I thoroughly agree with you and what you kind of observed in your history with working with organizations, that it's a very fine line to balance of how do we do that with positive incentives and negative incentives. And there's a balancing, a tipping point, which is very, somewhat flexible, but it's unique to each organization.
And Randy, the resources you make available, are those freely available to the public? You said there's some stuff on your website, right? All of that is free to the public, correct?
It is, yeah. If you were to go to CERT, C-E-R-T, CERT.org, on our website, we have over 125 plus reports that are focused specifically on insider threat research we've done. And then more broadly, as we said, CERT and the Software Engineering Institute do a lot more work in other areas outside of that as well. So yeah, feel free to go to the Software Engineering Institute website, or specifically the CERT division, which is CERT.org, not to be confused with US CERT, which is part of DHS. We did stand up US CERT, but we're not part of US CERT. So yes, those resources are available on our website.
Awesome. Randy, thank you so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly. Now you're presenting at InfoSec World. Do you have like a talk title, or everyone can just look for Randy's name in the program? But
yeah, happy to do that. It's a Saturday of. It's a day-long workshop on mitigating insider threats in your organization. So it's the Saturday before the official conference begins on Monday. It'll talk about insider threat identification, insider threat mitigation, ways to do anomaly detection, but also building formal programs, how you can do that effectively within your organization.
Fantastic. Randy, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
And with that, we'll take a short break, come back, and talk about the enterprise security news. Stay tuned.